The stated vision of 3DE is to systemically re-engineer high school education to expand economic opportunity for all students. And I'll say it again. To systemically re-engineer high school education to expand economic opportunity for all students. And there's three key terms in there that I'll hit on today. So one is systemically. It's about systemic change. The other is about re-engineering high school education. And the other is about expanding economic opportunity. So you can think about it in those three buckets. In 2013, I got a call from the gentleman who was the superintendent of Fulton County Schools at the time. Fulton County is a major school district in the Metro Atlanta area. And in a very simplified version of that conversation, he put this on the table. He said, if from an education perspective, our role as educators is to prepare today's students for the demands of tomorrow's economy, we are falling short. The economy is moving at a pace that none of us really understand, and that any changes that are being made at an education level, while good, are not keeping up with the pace of those changes around us. And so we continue to see this gap that's getting created, and you all see it in our work. People talk about talent pipeline gaps, skills gaps, lack of student engagement in school, youth unemployment, income inequality, lack of income mobility. There's all these statistics out there that demonstrate that. And what he said is that from a school district perspective, we don't necessarily have the core competencies to understand how to vastly expedite our change that's needed in order to address those future economic uncertainties. So what he said is, I'd be interested if you as JA, with your business connectivity that you have across the Metro Atlanta community, with your expertise around experiential learning, with your way to create learning that's relevant and engaging and hands-on to engage students in academics, with linking to the future of work, what would be your take, what would be your approach if you could have a blank slate to completely redesign education from the ground up? Who would be the teachers, what would be the approach, what would be the pedagogy, the curriculum, the student experience, and if you had an idea, let's work together to create a new model in education. That was the beginning story. So when you break down what was actually going on, and there was a few important things that have informed how we've created 3DE. First of all, is that there is a misnomer that there's not a lot of innovation in education. It's actually couldn't be further from the truth. There's a ton of innovation in education. You can go into any market, any city, any school. You can find innovative things that are happening at a classroom level or a school level or a teacher level. The larger issue is that a lot of that innovation hasn't been taken to scale, and it hasn't created systemic change. So it happens in two ways. One is that a lot of that happens outside the school district, outside the school system. So think charters, think other things. This stat really hit us. 90% of every single US student, 90% of the entire student population is still educated within a comprehensive traditional high school environment. And that comprehensive traditional high school environment, for the most part, still looks the way that it did 50 years ago. So our first principle was we want to focus in on where the majority of the students are, which is in traditional, comprehensive high schools that may have had a little bit of innovation, but they don't look that much different. The second thing that we really thought about is, this is not something that we can do on our own. This is not something that the school districts can do on their own. So we created a joint venture structure. We bring the best core competencies of the business community, of junior achievement in 3DE, of the school district to come together to create a joint venture that brings the innovation inside the school district to then work the innovation from the inside out. The other benefit of this, it's incredibly cost effective. For some of the presidents that were in session that we did yesterday, Wednesday, you heard me say that the total cost of doing a 3DE school is, of the total cost, 95% of it is through existing public allocation dollars. Only 5% is actually the incremental investment from the private sector. So think about this, 5% of incremental investment from the private sector leverages 95% of public allocation funding that's already in place. It's highly cost effective. It's less than $500 a student in incremental funds to do the type of outcomes that you saw before. The third thing that we thought about a lot is that there are enough And this actually was a term that the superintendent said. He said, there are enough Band-Aids on symptoms when it comes to trying to solve this issue. But if we're looking for systemic change, we have to think about this thing much differently. So when we talk about 3DE schools, we literally mean a school. It is a holistic, integrated, comprehensive school environment. Everything that you would normally think about school, we have. The difference is that from a 3DE perspective, we don't have to think about bus transportation, cafeteria, other types of operational things, because the school district handles all of that. We're just thinking about curriculum, the student experience, teaching and learning, and how to make all that more relevant. This is actually the footprint of Banneker High School that you see here. And so in every 3DE school, typically it will launch as a school within a school. And so in this case, we have about 600 students. That represents a third of the entire school. They're in a contiguous physical space. For some smaller schools, it might mean that we're launching with the entire 9th grade. But the school within a school is a really interesting idea when you think about it from a systemic change perspective, because it's coming in, serving the same community of students, demonstrating a completely different set of outcomes, so that in terms of change management, the rest of the school then starts looking and says, oh, that's interesting, we'd like to pull that across. If we had tried to do the entire school of Banneker as a 3DE school 4 years ago, it would have failed. And a lot of reform efforts within education tend to fail because trying to put the entire thing on a school when all that culture is there, that's difficult to be able to get it to transition out. As a school within a school, it can sit side by side. We can get the early adopters that want to come in, the teachers that want to come in, the administrators that want to come in, our team, to help move that change. Right before the holidays, the principal that you saw in the video, Duke Bradley, called a meeting with his team, the superintendent of the district, and with our team. And what he said was, I've called this meeting because I've been watching this for 3.5 years. 3DE has the same community of students as the rest of Banneker. There is no difference. The results that we're seeing in 3DE are completely undeniable. It would now be a moral dilemma if we didn't figure out how to bring this across the entire school. And so now here we have a principal and an entire administrative team that's saying, we are now ready for this to be the entire underpinning framework for our school community. Now, what that means, there's a lot of questions of what that takes, but think of that in terms of how that begins to systemically, remember back to the systemically aspect, systemically re-engineer how we think about high school education. It's not a program, it's not a side thing, it's not for some students, not for others. It's a completely different way of teaching and learning. So what is that completely different way of teaching and learning? Where rigor meets real world. The biggest issue that school districts are facing is that they know that learning today should be more project-based, should be more experiential, should be more linked to real-world complexities, be more linked to the real world in general. And yet, they're in an environment with standards-based accountabilities, and we all know that from a standards perspective. So how to bring standards in the core academic subjects, math, science, English, and history, together in a real-world scenario of project-based learning is what every educator in school is looking to do. It's extremely difficult to actually do that. So the work that we've done over the last 4 years is create a whole model based off of case method. So think of what happens at a graduate level, whether it's Harvard Business School, Darden at UVA, Goizueta in Atlanta, all these schools that use case method for students to go through real challenges, real life examples. That's the underpinning methodology of a 3DE school. So every 5 weeks, there's a different company or a different organization that sponsors a real-time, authentic case challenge that the company's currently going through, that the students are working in small group teams to research and analyze, solve, and present back to that company at the end of that 5-week period. And there's things like that that work in some schools. The difference with this is that because of the model that we've created, every single one of those teachers, the 9th grade English teacher, the 9th grade history teacher, the 9th grade math teacher, the 9th grade science teacher, are all teaching their standards and their concepts through the lens of how it's applied into that particular challenge for that particular month. So the students are seeing a complete interdisciplinary, connected world of how all these elements come together. You make learning more relevant, it will become more engaging. As it's more engaging, students start leaning into the academics, and you're able to unlock the full potential that's there for students. One of the things that Logan and Apollo didn't mention is that if we looked at the ninth grade of Banneker 4 years ago, the average reading and math level of that ninth grade at that time was at the 5th and 6th grade reading and math level. Those seniors, their class, are graduating not only on grade level, but at college level reading and math levels, and they caught up to grade level within their ninth grade year. Within 1 year, they caught up 3-4 levels in reading and math as an aggregate class. That's amazing from an education perspective. What happened there was creating the hook of having every single subject be relevant and engaging. The next step of this is, so then what happens after that? What happens after the academics? So those, you might follow future of work and the work that McKinsey Global Institute is doing around changing workforce needs. What happens when automation and AI takes over and displaces a lot of the existing jobs? What types of jobs are going to be left? The short of all that work is, there's actually going to be more jobs created than what will be lost through AI. Just 1/3 of them are going to be completely different. And the skills and competencies that are needed for the future are creativity, innovation, the analysis of information, critical thinking, analytical reasoning, problem solving, communication, collaboration. All of those elements are inherent in case method. Without even knowing it, students are practicing and iterating on those competencies to be ready for a future work that's still uncertain, but they'll have the agility to be able to navigate a career past that first job. So that gives you a little bit of a context as to what we're doing. Where it's going is that once we started realizing the potential of what this model had to truly re-engineer high school education and to expand economic opportunity for students, we began really thinking about what does it take to mean systemic change, both at a school level and a broader American education system level. To create systemic change, we have to have scale. We set a goal of saying, what would it look like if the 3DE model existed in 1 out of every 10 high schools in the country? It's 2,500 high schools. If it's focused on large, urban, comprehensive high schools, it's actually 1/3 of those high schools. 30% of the US student population. That would be a tipping point to get to. There's a long way to go from 1 school to 2,500 schools. And so we as a team have broken down into 4 phases of how to achieve that. The short of it is that we're right now in the transition point between phase 1 and phase 2. So in phase 1, we had 6 schools across Metro Atlanta. It was our pilot base. Going into phase 2, it's an expanded pilot. The idea is 55 schools across 7 states in the next 5 years. Working with states that are going to give us different variables and test cases that we wouldn't have seen in Georgia to be able to have a model that we can learn from and get out of pilot stage and flip to full scale. The next 5 years after that, the game plan is to go from the 55 schools to 500 schools. So right now we're still in a pilot phase, we're still in an incubation phase, we are in very much a startup phase and a learning phase. But all the work that we're doing now is to lay the groundwork to be able to fully scale this across the JA network to go from 55 to 500 in that, and if you think it as a 10-year period of time. Currently, and some of you already know this, some of the markets and states that we're already working with, we had identified Florida, Maryland, Texas, and California as the first states outside of Georgia where we're going to pilot this. Key reason behind that, we're focused on the largest urban school districts in the country. If you look at the 30 largest urban school districts in the country, 70% of them exist in those 5 states: Georgia, Florida, Maryland, Texas, California. So our early work for 2019, 2020, 2021 is focused in those areas. And then as we start to lay the groundwork for what happens in 2022 and beyond, we're starting that process now of beginning to think, what does that roadmap look like for that next set of markets, next set of states that we would be working with as we begin to continue to scale this out as we go. And so this next map just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of those markets. Don't pay too much attention to where the yellow circles are. In some cases, they're just illustrative of that we want to be in this pilot stage. We know that we need to be in different parts of the country because different parts of the country have different state standards, unions, all kinds of different variables that we have to build the model around to be able to have this be successful for scale. What I would say just in closing, as a part of thinking through this, I guess two things. One is that even in early stages, there's a compelling case to what's happening here. It was not easy raising money around this when we first started. We were able to raise about $10 million over 4 years for the pilot work in Atlanta. We've got a goal now to raise $55 million to cover the work for the next 5 years. So an investment pool of $55 million that would cover that 55 schools in those 7 states. Of that $55 million, $28 million of that has been secured so far. That happened within 6 months. And you can see some of what's there. What is important to point out is that, in retrospect, thinking about this, of that $28 million, 25 to 26 of that has come from Atlanta. So in 6 months, and this is in partnership with John and with Juan, in 6 months, we had $26 million committed from Atlanta funding sources for the scaling up of 3DE, both within Atlanta and Georgia and nationally. That would have been unfathomable when we had started this 4 years ago, but what it shows you is that the funders, the companies, the foundations that have been seeing this firsthand, that have been witnessing the work over the last 4 years that we've been leading along in that process, when it came time to say, okay, you've seen this happening. Do you believe in what you've been seeing? Are you willing to take that next leap of faith with us? They responded in ways that none of us would have expected beforehand. I was hoping if we could get $15 million out of Atlanta, that was going to be success. To get $25 million out of Atlanta has been incredible. And then you can see that as we go into other markets, that's where that remaining $55 million would come from as we start to build this out. But these funders are responding to this element of there's been a lot that's been done in this space that just hasn't worked. And what we know and what we've seen is that there's some unique differentiators about 3DE that are different than what anybody else has tried before, and it's working. And so it's worth putting some risk capital behind that, because at the end of the day, and on the plane ride over, I was reading McKinsey Global Institute's most recent report on the future of work. At the end of the day, if we do not figure out how to invest in the right ways in the next generation of students for where the future work is going, there is no way that the US economy continues to lift. So whether you come at it from a broader economic perspective, whether you come at it from a diversity and economic inclusion perspective, which is a lot where we come at it from, it's in the inherent best interest of all of us to really think about how do we do this in a way that addresses key systemic issues and root causes, and then work with our partners and the credibility that JA has established to be able to do that. And that's what I would end on. As we went around and have talked with other superintendents, have talked with potential funders, with partners that we're already working with, the credibility and infrastructure and connectivity that Junior Achievement has as an organization is unmatched by any organization in the country doing this type of work. True, someone else could have come up with the idea of what this is. But when you start talking about systemic change and scale, what's needed for that is trust and credibility with school districts, which we have, high degrees of connectivity and relationship with businesses to bring in case challenges and case studies to activate the curriculum, which we have, and an infrastructure and platform and foundation across the entire country to be able to bring that and activate it at a local level with consistency, with quality, and with fidelity. There's nobody else that can do this than Junior Achievement. And so while we've launched a new brand, and there's reasons for that, and while we've framed this a little bit differently than anything else that we've done in Junior Achievement, it's mutually dependent upon each other. And I think John says it really well from a Georgia perspective, that if you look at the broad strategic portfolio of Junior Achievement in Georgia, scaling up 3DE is one of those 3 main strategic priorities, and should be in any market that we're working with. That should be the case. So a lot more, obviously, that could be gone into here. Really excited about the progress that has been made over the last 12 months. extremely grateful for those JA markets that we're already working with in some of these early launch phases for, as I've said, taking an enormous leap of faith with us as we've gone through our own startup culture of evolving and being nimble and redefining and refining how we're going to market and how we're working. But at the end of the day, we can all be reminded by the stories of Logan and Apollo and the video from Duke that this is working, and it's a key element of Junior Achievement's future going forward.